The smell of old paper and dust always reminded me of my grandmother's attic, that peculiar scent of time trapped between cardboard and forgotten things. I never imagined that same smell would be the one to unravel 30 years of my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, unseasonably warm for Detroit, when I climbed into our attic looking for the box of winter clothes I'd stored away the previous spring. The sun was streaming through the small octagonal window, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the stale air. My husband, Jeremy, was at his office, as he always was on Tuesdays, working late on what he called his quarterly reports. I'd learned long ago not to question his schedule. Marriage, I thought, was built on trust. The attic ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed, each rung protesting with the voice of old wood and neglect. We'd been meaning to replace it for years, but like so many things in our marriage, it had fallen into that comfortable category of, we'll get to it eventually. The attic itself was exactly as I'd left it last fall, dusty, cramped, with that particular quality of air that feels like it's been breathed and rebreathed for decades. The afternoon light slanting through the window created a single beam of illumination, like a spotlight on a stage, and I had the strangest feeling that I was about to perform in a play I hadn't rehearsed for. The box I wanted was pushed far back, behind a stack of containers I didn't recognize. They were old, brown cardboard boxes, with Jeremy's handwriting on the sides, dates from the early 90s, before we'd even met. His handwriting was distinctive, all sharp angles and decisive strokes, the handwriting of a man who knew what he wanted and how to get it. Or so I'd always thought. My fingers were already dusty, my knees aching from crouching on the wooden planks, when curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I was just being practical, maybe consolidating storage space, but that would have been a lie. Something in me, some small voice I'd been ignoring for years, whispered that I needed to look. The first box contained old tax documents, nothing interesting. The second had college textbooks, their pages yellowed and brittle. But the third box was different. It was heavier, packed tighter, and when I opened it, the smell of old paper intensified. There were photo albums I'd never seen, pictures of Jeremy as a younger man, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, with deep brown skin that glowed even in the faded photographs, and eyes that crinkled when she smiled. In every photo, she looked at him with such complete adoration that it made something twist in my chest. Beneath the albums were documents, hospital bills from 1985, a lease agreement for an apartment in Chicago, a city Jeremy had told me he'd only visited twice, and then, wrapped in a yellowed piece of tissue paper, I found it. A birth certificate. The paper was official, embossed with the seal of Cook County, Illinois. Father's name, Jeremy Michael Harrison. Mother's name, Patricia Louise Harrison. Child's name, Jasmine Marie Harrison. Date of birth, June 14th, 1986. I sat back on my heels, the certificate trembling in my hands. The attic suddenly felt airless, too hot, too small. Jeremy and I had met in 1993. He'd told me he'd never been married, never had children. He'd said he was waiting for the right woman, and when he looked at me with those warm brown eyes and that gentle smile, I'd believed I was her. We'd built a life together here in Detroit, bought this house, shared 30 years of breakfasts and anniversaries and quiet evenings. And all of it, every single moment, had been constructed on a foundation of lies. My hands moved almost without my permission, pulling out more documents. There were birthday cards addressed to Daddy in a child's handwriting, school photos of a little girl with Jeremy's eyes and his mother's chin, letters from Patricia, dated throughout the late 80s and early 90s, asking for child support, begging him to visit, eventually just pleading for him to acknowledge his daughter's existence. The last letter was postmarked 1992, just months before Jeremy and I met. Jasmine asks about you every day, Patricia had written. She's 6 years old and she deserves to know her father. Your silence is cruel, Jeremy. Whatever I did to make you leave, she didn't do it. Please. I want to pause here for just a moment, if you don't mind. I'm so grateful you're taking the time to listen to this story, wherever you are right now. Whether you're driving, cooking dinner, or just trying to get through a difficult day, thank you for being here. Your support means everything to me, truly. It's what allows me to share these difficult truths. The sun had shifted by the time I could move again. My legs had gone numb from kneeling on the hard floor, but I barely noticed. I carefully placed everything back in the box, exactly as I'd found it, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. As I climbed down the attic ladder, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked the same. The same Diane Morrison who'd woken up that morning, made coffee, kissed her husband goodbye. But I wasn't the same. The woman looking back at me knew the truth now, and there was no unknowing it. Jeremy came home at 7:30, just like he did every Tuesday. I heard his key in the lock, the familiar sound of him setting down his briefcase in the entryway, the soft grunt as he took off his shoes. "Diane?" he called out, his voice warm and tired. "Something smells good." I'd made his favorite, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same meal I'd been making for 30 years. My grandmother's recipe, slow cooked until the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. The kitchen was filled with that rich, savory smell that usually made our house feel like home. But tonight, everything felt different. The warm lighting seemed harsh. The gentle hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud. Even the taste of the wine I'd poured myself, a Merlot we'd bought on our last anniversary trip, was bitter on my tongue. "In here," I called back, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. Jeremy appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his tie. He was still handsome at 62, with silver threading through his dark hair and deep laugh lines around his eyes. Those eyes that had looked at me with such love for 3 decades. Had any of it been real? "How was your day?" he asked, kissing my forehead before moving to pour himself a drink. The same question he asked every single evening. The same kiss, the same bourbon in the same crystal glass. "Quiet," I said, stirring the gravy. "I finally got around to organizing the attic." I watched him carefully, but there was no reaction. No tension in his shoulders, no pause in the pour of amber liquid into his glass. Either he'd forgotten what was hidden up there, or he was a better actor than I'd ever imagined. "That's good," he said absently, scrolling through his phone. "Been meaning to do that for years." We ate dinner at the table like we always did, discussing mundane things, the neighbor's new fence, the strange noise my car was making, whether we should repaint the guest room. Jeremy complimented the pot roast. I smiled and thanked him. We were playing our parts perfectly, this decades-long performance of a happy marriage. But now I could see the stage, the props, the careful choreography of it all. That night, lying in bed beside him, I listened to his breathing slow and deepen into sleep. The ceiling fan turned lazy circles above us, and through the window, I could hear the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Jeremy rolled over, his arm draping across my waist in his sleep, and I had to fight the urge to push him away. This man, this stranger, had held me through my father's funeral, had nursed me through pneumonia, had danced with me in this very bedroom on countless Saturday mornings. Who was he? Had I ever really known him at all? The next morning, I called in sick to my job at the library, something I rarely did. As soon as Jeremy left for work, I was back in the attic, this time with my phone, photographing every single document. The birth certificate, the letters, the photos, the hospital bills. Each click of the camera shutter felt like a small act of reclamation, taking back some measure of control over my own story. But photographs weren't enough. I needed to understand the full scope of his deception. I opened my laptop and began to search. Patricia Louise Harrison, Chicago, brought up a LinkedIn profile. She was a teacher now, living in Aurora, Illinois. Her profile picture showed a woman in her 60s, still beautiful, with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. Under her work history, I found her maiden name, Patricia Louise Winters. Jasmine Marie Harrison led me to Facebook. And there she was, Jeremy's daughter. Our daughter, technically, though she'd never know me. She was 37 years old, a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Her page was public, filled with photos of her own children, 2 boys and a girl, all under 10. Jeremy's grandchildren. My step-grandchildren, though I had no claim to them. In one photo, Jasmine stood beside an older woman who could only be Patricia, both of them laughing at some shared joke. The caption read, "Mother's Day with my best friend. Love you, Mom." I scrolled through years of Jasmine's posts, graduations, weddings, baby announcements, all the milestones Jeremy had missed, or more accurately, had chosen not to be present for. There were no mentions of her father, no photos with a man who might be Jeremy. It was as if he'd never existed in her life at all. The anger came then, hot and sharp, rising from somewhere deep in my belly. How dare he? How dare he abandon his own child and then build a new life with me, accepting my devotion, my loyalty, my blind trust? How dare he hold me while I cried about never having children of my own? I'd had 3 miscarriages in our early years together. When he already had a daughter he'd walked away from? If you're listening to this and finding yourself invested in what happens next, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this one matter, and your support helps me continue sharing them. Thank you for being part of this community. I spent the next week in a state of controlled fury, gathering information like a general preparing for war. I contacted a divorce attorney. Not the one Jeremy and I had used to draw up our wills, but someone new. Her name was Simone Patterson, and her office was in downtown Detroit, on the 15th floor of a glass building that overlooked the river. She was younger than me, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. 30 years, she said, when I'd finished explaining everything. She didn't sound surprised, just weary, as if she'd heard this story 100 times before in 100 different variations. And you had no idea about the first family? None, I said. My voice cracked slightly on the word, and I hated myself for it. I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry in this office. Simone leaned back in her leather chair, tapping a pen against her desk. In Michigan, we're a no-fault divorce state, which means his infidelity, if we can call a secret family that, won't directly impact the settlement. But, she held up a finger, fraudulent concealment is another matter entirely. If we can prove that he deliberately hid assets or income because of this secret family, that changes things considerably. He pays for her education, I said, pulling out another document I'd found. I found old check stubs. He's been sending money to Patricia for years, listed in our accounts as consulting fees, to a P.L. Winters Consulting. I always thought it was related to his business. Simone's eyes lit up. That's excellent. What else? Over the next hour, I laid out everything, the hidden documents, the false identity he'd essentially created for himself, the financial deception. Simone took notes, her pen flying across her yellow legal pad. Here's what we're going to do, she said finally. We're going to conduct a forensic examination of all of your financial accounts, bank statements, credit cards, investments, everything. If he's been diverting marital assets to support his first family without your knowledge, that's fraud. We can argue that he's been depleting marital assets for years. How long will this take? I asked. A few weeks to gather everything, maybe a month to build the case properly. She looked at me directly, her expression serious. Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you something. Are you certain you want to go through with this? 30 years is a long time. Some couples choose counseling, mediation. No, I said, and the firmness in my own voice surprised me. He had 30 years to tell me the truth, 30 years to introduce me to his daughter, to explain his past, to give me the choice of whether I wanted to be part of this. He took that choice away from me. Every single day for 30 years, he looked me in the face and chose the lie. I'm choosing myself now. Simone smiled, a small, approving quirk of her lips. Then let's make sure you're protected. I'll need you to start documenting everything, his schedule, his habits, where money goes. But be subtle. We don't want him to suspect anything until we're ready to file. The next month was the strangest of my life. By day, I was still Diane Morrison, devoted wife, dutiful librarian, friendly neighbor. I made Jeremy's coffee in the morning, asked about his day, planned our meals. We watched television together in the evenings, his hand resting on my knee, mine tolerating his touch. At night, we slept in the same bed, though I'd started sleeping as close to my edge as possible, creating an invisible barrier between us. But in the spaces he couldn't see, I was someone else entirely. I was a detective, tracking his every financial move. I was a strategist, planning my exit with military precision. I was a woman waking up from a 30-year sleep, and the waking hurt more than I could have imagined. I discovered that the consulting fees to P.L. Winters weren't the only deception. There were regular cash withdrawals, always on Wednesdays, always for $200. I followed him one Wednesday, calling in sick to work, trailing his silver Lexus from a careful distance. He drove to a Western Union in a strip mall on the east side, the kind of place we'd never normally go. I watched from my car as he went inside, emerged 15 minutes later, and drove back to his office. Later, I called the Western Union, pretending to be following up on a transfer. "Yes, ma'am." The board clerk said, "We show regular weekly transfers to Jasmine Harrison in Chicago. Would you like the tracking numbers?" My hands were shaking so hard I could barely write them down. He was still supporting her, his daughter. All these years, every Wednesday, while I balanced our checkbook and worried about our retirement savings, he'd been sending money to the child he'd abandoned. I found old emails, too, recovered from a laptop he thought he'd wiped years ago. Messages between Jeremy and Patricia from the early days of our marriage. "She doesn't know about us," he'd written. "It's better this way. Cleaner. You have your life. I have mine." Patricia's response had been cold. "Your daughter deserves better than a father who pretends she doesn't exist. But I've stopped expecting anything from you, Jeremy. Just keep the money coming." There were more recent emails from Jasmine herself. They'd started about 5 years ago, tentative at first. "I know you probably won't respond to this, but I wanted you to know I'm getting married." Then, a year later, "You have a grandson. His name is Jeremy, after you, though I don't know why I did that." And then, most recently, just 6 months ago, "I'm done reaching out. I'm done hoping you'll suddenly decide to be a father. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay. And I'm happy, and I managed that all without you." Jeremy had never responded to a single message. "I want to pause the story here and ask you something. Have you ever experienced a betrayal like this? Maybe not exactly the same, but that moment when you realized someone you trusted had been living a double life? If you have a story you'd like to share, please leave it in the comments below. Sometimes it helps to know we're not alone in these experiences. Your stories matter, and I read every single comment. The forensic accountant Simone hired was a small woman named Dr. Cheryl Tang, who spoke in precise, clipped sentences and saw patterns in numbers the way some people saw shapes in clouds. She spent 2 weeks examining our finances, and when she came back with her report, her expression was grim. "Over the past 30 years, she said, sitting in Simone's office with spreadsheets spread across the desk, your husband has diverted approximately $847,000 from marital assets, the consulting fees to P.L. Winters, the weekly cash withdrawals, several business expenses that were actually payments to his daughter. It adds up. That's $847,000 that should have been invested in your joint retirement, your home, your future together." The number was so large it didn't feel real. "Nearly $1 million, I said, slowly. "And that's just what I could definitively trace," Dr. Tang said. "There are other irregularities I'm suspicious of, but can't prove without subpoenaing records from his business accounts, which we can do once you file." Simone leaned forward. "Diane, in Michigan, you're entitled to half of all marital assets. But given this level of financial fraud, we can argue for much more. He's been essentially stealing from you for 30 years. The house is in both your names, correct?" "Yes," I said. "And the lake house, and our investment portfolio. His pension. He has one through his company, but I'd have to check the details." Over the next hour, we built a strategy. Simone would file for divorce and simultaneously file a motion to freeze all assets. We'd seek an immediate restraining order, preventing Jeremy from accessing any joint accounts or selling any joint property. And we'd request a forensic examination of his business, looking for any other hidden assets. "He's going to be blindsided," Simone warned. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Patricia's letters, begging him to acknowledge his daughter. I thought about Jasmine's emails, each one a small hope extended and crushed. I thought about 30 years of my own life, given freely to a man who'd never really been honest with me. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." We scheduled the filing for a Thursday, early enough that Jeremy would be served at his office. I wanted him to be surrounded by colleagues and clients when the papers arrived, wanted him to feel the same public humiliation I'd feel once people knew the truth. Simone cautioned me that revenge wasn't a good motivator, but I disagreed. Revenge, properly channeled, was fuel. It was the thing that got me out of bed each morning. It was what kept my hands steady when everything inside me wanted to shake apart. The night before the filing, I cooked one last meal. Not pot roast this time. I'd never make that again, but fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread. My grandmother's recipes, the foods I'd grown up with, the tastes of a life before Jeremy. He ate with his usual appreciation, complimenting each dish, completely oblivious to what was coming. "This is wonderful," he said, reaching for a second piece of chicken. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I said. "Just felt like cooking." After dinner, we sat on the back porch watching the sun set over our garden. The roses I'd planted 10 years ago were in full bloom, their scent sweet and heavy in the evening air. Jeremy reached for my hand, and I let him take it, feeling the familiar calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. "I love you, Diane," he said softly. "You know that, right?" I looked at him then, really looked at him. In the fading light, I could see every line on his face, every gray hair, every familiar feature. This man who'd shared my bed, my life, my dreams. This stranger who'd lied to me every single day for 30 years. "I know you think you do," I said finally. He frowned slightly, confused, but I stood before he could question me. "I'm tired. I think I'll turn in early." That night, I barely slept. I lay in the darkness, listening to Jeremy breathe, thinking about how tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow, the careful structure of lies would come crashing down. Tomorrow I would stop being Diane Morrison, devoted wife, and become something new, something I hadn't quite defined yet. The process server arrived at Jeremy's office at 9:15 in the morning. I know because Simone called me immediately afterward. "It's done," she said. "He's been served. We filed for the restraining order on the account simultaneously. He won't be able to access anything without court approval." "Thank you," I said, though the words felt inadequate. I was at home, having taken the day off work. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if it had been holding its breath along with me. Jeremy called at 9:30. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 9:45, then 10, then 10:15. After the fifth call, I finally answered. "Diane!" His voice was strained, panicked. "Diane, what the hell is this? I just got divorce papers. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," I said calmly. I was sitting in the kitchen at the same table where we'd eaten so many meals together. Through the window, I could see the bird feeder Jeremy had hung for me last spring, sparrows pecking at the seeds. "But why? We're happy. We've been happy for 30 years. The confusion in his voice sounded genuine, and that made it worse somehow. Did he really not know? Did he really believe his own performance? "I found the box, Jeremy. In the attic." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear his breathing, quick and shallow, could almost see him standing in his office, his mind racing. "What box?" he finally said, but his voice had changed. The panic was gone, replaced by something careful, calculating. The box with Patricia's letters, with Jasmine's birth certificate, with 30 years of lies. Another long silence. Then, "Diane, I can explain—" "No," I said, and the firmness in my voice surprised even me. "You can't. There's no explanation that makes this okay. You had a daughter, Jeremy, a daughter you abandoned. And then you married me and lied to me every single day for 3 decades. You let me cry over my miscarriages while you already had a child you'd walked away from. You let me believe I knew you when I didn't know you at all." "That was a long time ago," he said, and now I could hear desperation creeping into his voice. "Before we met. It was a mistake. That whole relationship with Patricia, I was young and stupid." "Jasmine wasn't a mistake," I cut him off. "She was a human being, your daughter, and you treated her like she didn't exist." "I sent money," he protested. "I made sure they were taken care of financially." "You sent guilt payments," I said. "That's not the same as being a father, and you stole that money from me, from us, from our marriage. Did you know that? Over 30 years, you diverted $847,000 of our money to cover up your lies. How did you—" He stopped, and I could hear the realization settling over him. "You hired someone. You've been planning this." "I've been Uncovering the truth, I corrected. Something you never gave me the courtesy of doing yourself. Diane, please. Now his voice was pleading. Don't do this. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I'll tell you everything. It's too late, Jeremy. It's been too late for 30 years. You just didn't know it until now. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were steady, my breathing even. I felt, for the first time in weeks, like I could take a full breath. He tried to come home that afternoon, but I'd had the locks changed that morning. He stood on the porch, knocking, calling my name, and I watched him from the upstairs window. Eventually, he gave up and drove away, and I watched his silver Lexus disappear down the street, carrying him out of my life. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Jeremy's lawyer tried to argue for reconciliation, for mediation, but Simone shut that down immediately. Once Dr. Tang's financial report was submitted to the court, the judge was not sympathetic to Jeremy's position. Fraudulent concealment of assets, systematic financial deception. These were serious matters. Jeremy tried to reach me multiple times over the next few weeks, emails, phone calls, even a letter delivered to Simone's office. In the letter, he finally told me everything. How he'd met Patricia in college, how they'd married young, how he'd felt trapped when she got pregnant, how he'd left when Jasmine was a baby, started over in Detroit, tried to build a new life, how he'd met me and fallen in love, and convinced himself that his past didn't matter, that he could just move forward without looking back. I know I made mistakes, he wrote, but I love you, Diane. I've loved you for 30 years. That was real. Please believe that was real. But that was the thing. I couldn't know what was real anymore. Maybe he had loved me, in his way. Maybe every kind word, every gentle touch, every quiet evening together had been genuine. But it had all been built on a foundation of lies, and once that foundation crumbled, nothing could stand. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. In the settlement, I received the house, the lake house, 70% of our investment portfolio, and half of Jeremy's pension. It was more than I would have gotten in a standard divorce, but the judge agreed that Jeremy's financial deception warranted a punitive split. He also ordered Jeremy to pay my legal fees, which had been substantial given the forensic accounting and investigative work. You won, Simone said, when she called to tell me the final judgment had been signed. Completely and thoroughly, you won. But sitting in my empty house that evening, I wasn't sure won was the right word. I'd lost 30 years. I'd lost my faith in my own judgment. I'd lost the future I'd imagined, growing old with Jeremy, retiring together, maybe traveling the world like we'd always planned. What I'd gained was truth and freedom, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to walk away from a life that had been built on deception, no matter how comfortable that life had been. A week after the divorce was finalized, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I wrote a letter to Jasmine. I didn't send it to her directly. I didn't want to intrude on her life any more than I already had by virtue of being connected to Jeremy. Instead, I sent it to Patricia, with a note explaining who I was and asking her to pass it along if she thought it was appropriate. The letter was simple. I told Jasmine that I was sorry. Sorry that her father had been the kind of man who could walk away from his own child. Sorry that I'd unknowingly been part of his deception, living a life he'd built while she grew up without him. Sorry that it had taken me so long to discover the truth. I told her about the divorce, about the financial settlement, and I made her an offer. Half of what I'd been awarded in the divorce I would give to her, not as guilt money, not as an apology that could never be adequate, but as an acknowledgement that Jeremy's debts, emotional and financial, were also owed to her. I didn't expect a response. In fact, I hoped there wouldn't be one. What could she possibly say to me, the woman who'd been married to her absent father for longer than she'd known him? But 3 weeks later, I received an email. The subject line was simple. Thank you. Dear Diane, Jasmine had written, I don't know how to respond to your letter, except to say thank you for your honesty and your generosity. You didn't owe me anything. You're as much a victim of my father's lies as I am. But I appreciate your offer, and I accept it. Not for myself, but for my children. Their college funds will benefit from this, and that feels like something good coming from something painful. I don't have any ill will toward you. You seem like a kind person who deserved better than what my father gave you. I hope you find peace and happiness in whatever comes next. With gratitude, Jasmine. I cried when I read that email, the first real tears I'd allowed myself since finding that box in the attic. Not tears of sadness, exactly, but of release, of recognition. Jasmine had offered me something I hadn't even known I needed. Absolution. She didn't blame me, didn't hate me, didn't see me as complicit in Jeremy's abandonment. She saw me as another person hurt by the same man. The money transfer took a few weeks to arrange, but when it was done, I felt lighter. Jeremy's lawyer contacted Simone in a fury. Apparently, Jeremy was livid that I'd given his money to Jasmine. But legally, the money was mine to do with as I pleased. The divorce settlement had been finalized, and my financial decisions were no longer any of his business. That's when I knew I'd truly moved on. Not because I'd stopped being angry. I don't think that anger will ever completely disappear. But because Jeremy's opinion of my choices no longer mattered. To me, he'd lost the right to have an opinion about my life the moment I found that birth certificate in the attic. It's been 6 months now since the divorce was finalized. I still live in the house. Our house, though it's just mine now. I've redecorated slowly, replacing memories with new furnishings, new colors, new energy. The guest room is now a reading nook, filled with books and a comfortable chair that faces the window. I spend a lot of time there, especially in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I've reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with over the years, women from college and early jobs who'd drifted away as I'd focused more and more on my life with Jeremy. They've been supportive, angry on my behalf, helpful in ways I couldn't have anticipated. One of them, Rita, was also divorced a few years ago, and she's become my guide through this strange new landscape of single life after 60. It gets better, she told me over coffee last week. Not easier, necessarily, but better. You start to remember who you were before him, and then you start to figure out who you want to be now. I'm working on that, figuring out who I want to be. I've started taking pottery classes at the community center, something I'd wanted to do for years but never made time for. My hands are usually covered in clay now, and there's something deeply satisfying about shaping something beautiful out of formless earth, creating something from nothing, starting over. I haven't heard from Jeremy directly since the divorce was finalized. I know from mutual acquaintances that he's struggling. He had to sell his business to meet the settlement, and he's living in a small apartment on the other side of town. Part of me feels sorry for him, the part that shared 30 years of life with this person. But mostly, I feel nothing. He made his choices every day for 3 decades, and now he's living with the consequences. I do think about Patricia and Jasmine sometimes. I wonder what their lives are like, whether they've found peace with Jeremy's absence. I hope they have. I hope Jasmine's children never have to know the disappointment of a grandfather who couldn't be bothered to show up. I hope Patricia found love again, someone who deserved her loyalty and devotion. And I think about that box in the attic, the one that changed everything. Sometimes I'm grateful I found it. Grateful for the truth, even though it shattered my world. Sometimes I wonder if ignorance would have been easier, if I could have lived out my days never knowing about the lies. But I don't think so. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from living in truth, even when that truth is painful. It's better than building a life on beautiful lies. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for taking this journey with me. If my story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question your own life in some way, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button. Stories like these, stories of betrayal and survival and resilience, they matter. They remind us that we're not alone in our pain and that we're stronger than we think. Please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. This community we're building together, it's special. It's a place where we can be honest about the hard things, where we can support each other through the difficult truths. I'll be back next time with another story, another truth. Until then, take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember, you deserve honesty. You deserve the full truth, and you deserve a love that doesn't require you to live in the dark.